By the time the world fell apart, I had already been living among explosives for 8 years. My name is Ryan Keller. Before anyone called them the infected, before the news anchors stopped smiling, I was just a civilian ammunition technician at an Army ammunition supply point outside of Pueblo, Colorado. On paper, it was a support facility for Fort Carson, a grid of dirt roads and numbered earth-covered bunkers laid out in rows across the prairie. To me, it was a quiet job with steady pay, a place where days were measured in pallets, lot numbers, and paperwork. The ammo depot sat a few miles off the highway, behind 2 layers of fencing and a locked swing gate. Each storage bunker was a low concrete structure buried under a mound of earth, with a thick steel door, ventilation pipes, and lightning rods sticking up like thin metal trees. Between them were gravel lanes, wooden signposts, and yellow-painted curbs that marked safety distances. We stored everything from 5.56 rifle cartridges to illumination rounds for artillery. Out front, by the admin building, there was a small parking lot, a flagpole, and a single-lane road that wound back toward the main base. On the morning the first serious alerts came, I remember thinking how normal everything felt. The wind was pushing tumbleweed against the perimeter fence. A freight train was crawling along the tracks in the distance. I was in Bunker 12, counting cans of linked machine gun ammunition when my work phone buzzed. "Richards," I answered. He was my supervisor in the office, a retired staff sergeant who never stopped sounding like he was still in uniform. "Ryan, come up front," he said. His voice was tight. "Base just sent out a force protection bulletin. We're moving to limited ops. We're going to brief everybody." "On my way," I said. When I stepped out of the bunker, I caught the first sign that something was off. The hum of traffic on the distant highway was louder than usual, a constant, uneven roar instead of the usual flow. I could see more vehicles than normal. Tiny, shining dots backed up in both directions. By the time I reached the admin building, the 6 other people on shift had already gathered in the small conference room. There was Richards, Specialist Lewis, a young soldier assigned to help with inventory, Ortega, our civilian mechanic, Maria Torres, a military police sergeant who handled our access control, and 2 truck drivers from the transport company that hauled ammo out to training ranges. The television in the corner, usually tuned to some morning show, was locked on a cable news channel. The ticker at the bottom wrapped around the same phrases: unrest, aggressive behavior, quarantine zones. The anchor's practiced smile was gone. Richards killed the volume with the remote. "Here's what I've got," he said, holding up his phone. "Fort Carson is moving to core essential operations only. That means training is suspended, ammo issue is paused, and on-post civilians are being told to stand by or go home if they're not critical. There's a shelter-in-place advisory for Colorado Springs and Pueblo. Law enforcement and medical are overwhelmed." "Is this that virus thing?" Lewis asked. "My girlfriend texted me about some video of people fighting in a grocery store." "It's not just fighting," Maria said quietly. She had her own radio on her belt, the one tied into the base net. "They're calling it a behavior-altering infection. People get bit, they change, and then they start attacking others. They don't respond to commands. Non-lethal doesn't work." "There's no way that's real," one of the truck drivers said, shaking his head. His name was Dixon. He was older than the rest of us, with the permanent sunburn of someone who lived on the road. "Sounds like some prank." "They just locked down the main gate," Maria said. "My unit got the alert on our internal channel. We are supposed to keep this facility secure and wait for further guidance." "So we sit on a few thousand tons of explosives while the world goes crazy," Ortega muttered. "That's comforting." I looked around the room. On paper, we were just support personnel, the quiet end of the military machine. But the depot was more than a pile of crates. It had its own fence line, its own guard shack, its own cameras, generators, and water tanks. If unrest spread off the base, the depot was going to become a very important target, and not just for any infected that wandered out this way. "Our job is the same it's always been," Richard said, though his eyes were darting between the TV and Maria's radio. "We secure what we're responsible for. We account for people and ammo. We wait for orders." For a while, that is exactly what we did. We spent the rest of the day closing out open work orders, locking down any bunkers we had open, and double-checking the entry logs. The truck drivers tried to get clearance to roll out and head back toward town, but were told to hold. The base roads had been restricted to mission-essential traffic only. No one could tell us when that would change. By early afternoon, the phone in the office had stopped ringing. The email server went quiet. Even the radio chatter on Maria's belt slowed and then turned into a mix of static and clipped, anxious voices. "Contact at the east gate. They're not stopping. Medical station overrun, pulling back to, repeat, falling back." Then, eventually, nothing clear at all. From the back door of the admin building, I watched the highway. The earlier traffic had turned into a steady stream of cars pushing north and south, some pulling off onto the frontage roads, some stopped at odd angles. A plume of smoke rose somewhere beyond the hills. Sirens wailed in the distance. We locked the main access gate to the ammo depot and slid a heavy steel pipe behind it for extra reinforcement. Maria took the first watch at the small guard shack beside the gate. We all assumed this was temporary, that someone from the base would roll out with a convoy and either take over or bring us in. Nobody came. By sunset, we had a choice: leave and try our luck on the highways, or stay and treat the depot as a defensive site. "We've got food for a week in the break room, maybe more if we stretch the vending machines," Dixon said, scratching his chin. "Water from the main line, a fence, a whole lot of stuff that goes boom. Could be worse." "We don't run away from a secure facility loaded with ammunition when every law enforcement channel I'm hearing is asking for support," Maria said. "This depot was designed to be isolated. It's easier to defend than some random spot in town." Richards looked tired. "The main base is compromised. The phone system is a mess. We don't even know if the highway is passable anymore. I won't order anyone to stay. But I'm staying. And if we do stay, we do it right. We secure this place for the long haul." I knew what my answer was even before he finished talking. I lived in a small rental in town with thin walls and one flimsy deadbolt. At the depot, we had concrete, steel, and distance. "I'm in," I said. One by one, the others nodded. Even Dixon, who had a wife and grown kids in Albuquerque, agreed to stay for at least a few more hours, hoping we'd get clearer information. Those hours turned into days. The first night, none of us slept much. We rotated in pairs between the gate shack, the admin building, and a small tower near the perimeter, where a camera mast gave a clear view of the surrounding prairie. I took a midnight shift with Ortega, sitting in metal folding chairs on the admin building roof. We watched the glow of fires near the city and listened to the low, distant sound that might have been engines, might have been wind. Around 3 a.m, we heard the first scream. It carried faintly over the fields, high and raw, then cut off. We scanned with binoculars but saw nothing moving along the fence. The sound could have come from a farmstead, a car on a back road, anywhere. "They'll hit places with people first," Ortega said quietly. "We're low on that list." "That's good," I said. "I'm not sure it is," he answered. "Because when they run out of people in town, they'll start walking, and if they follow the roads and the tracks, they're going to find this place eventually." In the morning, we stopped pretending this was a short-term event. The news channels had gone to continuous emergency graphics. The anchors were broadcasting from what looked like secure studios. The word "pandemic" flashed in red across the screen, then "civil unrest," and finally, "state of emergency." "Look at this," Lewis said, pointing. Someone had managed to send drone footage from a major city. Streets clogged with abandoned vehicles, clusters of people moving in jerky, erratic ways, others running. A line of police cars, some empty, some surrounded. The footage cut away just as the crowd surged. "Cut the TV," Maria said. "We need a plan, not nightmares." The plan started with the gate. Our existing barrier was designed to slow cars and trucks, not stop determined attackers or a crowd that didn't care about bullets or commands. We walked the fence line, studying every angle. The outer fence was chain link, topped with barbed wire, running in a big rectangle. Inside that, around the bunkers, was a shorter inner fence that mostly kept wildlife away from the buildings. "We need choke points," Maria said. "Places where anything trying to get in is forced to bunch up. Places we can see clearly and cover with fire if we have to." "The rows between bunkers are long straight lines," I said. "We don't want anything getting into those and rushing us." We decided to fortify the front third of the depot and abandon the rear, at least for now. There were 32 bunkers on site, plus some empty pads. Holding all of that with 7 people would stretch us too thin. Instead, we chose 10 bunkers near the admin building and gate to form a rough horseshoe around the parking lot and central lane. We used Ortega's forklift and Dixon's favored flatbed truck to move heavy objects into place. There were stacks of empty wooden crates, steel shipping containers that had once held ammunition, and concrete barriers from a previous construction project. We dragged them into rough walls, leaving narrow lanes for vehicles we controlled and plugging every other gap. Maria rolled out the coils of concertina wire from a storage shed and looped them along the outer fence in front of the gate, adding depth to the barrier. We set up a secondary inner gate using those same concrete barriers. If the outer line failed, we could fall back to the horseshoe and still have cover. Inside the bunkers we picked for our stronghold, we moved anything we might need into the first 2 rows. Cases of rifle and pistol ammunition, wooden boxes of flares, smoke grenades, and signal rounds, plus a pallet of blank cartridges we could modify for training or other purposes. In one empty bunker, we stacked bottled water, spare clothing, blankets, and food taken from vending machines, the break room, and any soldiers' lockers that had been left behind. That first day of real work kept us from thinking too much. We labored in the dust and wind, hauling and lifting until our shoulders burned. At lunch, we sat on crates under the shade of a bunker overhang and chewed through protein bars and canned soup heated on a small camp stove. This place was built to keep people away from the ammo, Dixon said, looking around. Now we're flipping the script. Ammo is what makes this place worth holding. Weapons are still the weak link, Maria said. This depot was never meant to be a combat outpost. We have a few rifles and pistols in the guard locker, but not enough long guns for everyone, especially if more people show up. Range 3's arms room, I said. They always kept some training rifles and shotguns there. It's only about 20 minutes down the service road near the small arms range. That road might not be safe anymore, Lewis said. Staying here with 7 people and 3 rifles isn't safe either, she replied. In the end, we chose 3 people to make the run. Maria, me, and Lewis. We took a tan cargo pickup with a reinforced front bumper and pulled a small covered trailer. Ortega topped off the tank from our on-site fuel storage, a pair of above-ground tanks used for forklifts and maintenance vehicles. Before we rolled out, Maria laid a map across the hood. It showed the back roads between our depot and the rest of the base. We go straight there and back, she said. No side trips. We avoid the main cantonment area. Stick to the service lanes. If we see barricades or crowds, we turn around. No hero stuff. Got it? We all nodded. The drive started off eerily quiet. The road leaving the ammo depot ran straight for a couple miles, with open fields on both sides and the occasional power line. In the distance, we could see the main base buildings and motor pool lots. Smoke rose from several areas, thin and dark. As we got closer, the signs of chaos became clearer. A Humvee sat at an angle in a ditch, its doors open. A white pickup with base decals was stopped in the middle of the road with its hood up. There were no bodies, but there were dark stains on the pavement that I tried not to look at too closely. Maria kept our speed moderate, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the rifle propped between our seats. Lewis sat in the back with another rifle, watching out the rear window. That's Range 3 up ahead, I said, pointing. The small arms range complex sat in a shallow depression, with a parking lot, control tower, and a low concrete building that housed the arms room and classroom. From a distance, it looked intact. Then we saw the first figure. A man in a torn uniform moved slowly across the edge of the parking lot, his gait uneven. His head twitched as we approached and he changed direction, angling toward the sound of our engine. Another person appeared behind him, then another. Their clothes were stained. Their faces were turned toward us with a focus that made something in my stomach knot. "That's not good," Lewis said quietly. "Windows up," Maria said. "We do not get close enough for them to grab. If there are only a few, we can draw them away and circle back." As we neared the lot entrance, one of the infected broke into an awkward, loping run, arms pumping in short, jerky motions. A second followed. Their speed was uneven, suddenly quick, then stumbling, but they were closing the distance faster than I liked. Maria swung the wheel, turning us in a tight arc that kept us just out of their reach. They changed direction again, tracking the sound. Maria gave the engine a quick rev, baiting them farther into the open field on the far side of the road. "Lewis, watch the tree line," she said. "I don't want anything coming up behind us." We made a wide loop, keeping enough room to react if one of them darted closer. They seemed to have no sense of self-preservation. One tripped over a small drainage ditch, hit the ground, and got back up without even looking down. Once they were 20 or 30 yards away from the lot entrance, Maria pulled us back onto the road and accelerated. The infected stretched out hands toward the truck as we passed, but were too slow to reach us. In the rear-view mirror, I saw them pivot again, now focused on the fading sound of our engine. We parked on the far side of the range complex, away from the parking lot, using the building itself as a shield. Maria killed the engine. The silence pressed in immediately. "Fast and quiet," she said. "We're in and out. If they follow us, we pull back to the truck and leave." The arms room door was locked, but the keys hanging on a pegboard in the classroom were still there. Inside the inner room, rows of metal racks held training rifles and pump-action shotguns. We grabbed what we could: 6 additional rifles, 4 shotguns, and as many spare magazines as we could carry. The ammunition cage had several cans of 5.56 and 12-gauge shells. We loaded them onto a handcart and rolled it out to the truck. I kept one ear tuned for any sound from the parking lot. A distant thump, a scrape, then the thin, flat bang of something hitting metal. "They're at the control tower door," Lewis said, peering around the corner, trying to get in, just hitting it over and over. "Let's not be here when they figure out the noise has moved," Maria said. At one point, we caught sight of another infected standing across the lane, staring at us with a strange, fixed focus. I met his eyes for a second. There was nothing there I recognized as normal human response. No hesitation, no caution, just intent. We carried the last armful of gear to the truck, threw the handcart into the trailer, and got out of there. By the time we rolled back through our depot's gate, the sun was angling low. Ortega and Dixon met us in the parking lot, eyes wide. "How bad?" Ortega asked. "Bad," Maria said simply. "But we got what we needed." We spent that night assigning weapons. Everyone who would stand a watch post got either a rifle or shotgun and a sidearm where possible. We ran a short crash course on safe handling for Dixon and Ortega, who were familiar with firearms but not with military models. Lewis helped me issue magazines and set up a simple ammo log in a notebook. That was the start. The next step was people. On the 3rd day after the initial lockdown, we saw the first civilians walking down the access road toward the depot. I spotted them from the camera mast tower, a small cluster of figures on the straight 2-lane leading in. At first, I thought they might be soldiers, but as they approached, I saw jeans, jackets, and a rolling suitcase. 4 adults and 1 small child, all moving with the exhausted shuffle of people who had been on their feet for too long. "Maria," I said into the handheld radio, "we've got people coming down the road. They look normal, no obvious injuries. They're carrying bags." "I'm on my way to the gate," she replied. Letting outsiders into a secure ammo facility went against every procedure I had ever signed, but so did ignoring someone who looked like they were about to collapse. We met them at the outer gate, behind the barrier of wire and concrete. Maria spoke through the chain link. "Stop right there," she called. "Hands where we can see them." The group froze. A woman in her 30s, with a flannel shirt and a baseball cap, raised both hands. The others mimicked her. "We're not armed," she said, her voice hoarse. "We came from town. The city is a mess. We saw the fences and hoped there were people here. We just want somewhere safe." "Any of you bitten or scratched?" Maria asked. "No," the woman said. "We stayed on the back roads, kept clear of crowds. We saw some of them, but we stayed clear." "That's my sister," Dixon whispered beside me, his face going pale. "Megan, and that's her boy, Caleb." He stepped forward, forgetting for a moment the barrier between us. "Megan," he shouted, "it's me." She blinked, then her face crumpled in relief. "Danny," she cried, "I thought you were gone. The phone stopped. We came this way because we thought you might still be on the base routes." Behind her, the little boy stared at our rifles with wide eyes. We brought them inside, but not past the inner line. Maria set up a quarantine area in an empty administrative room next to the guard shack. We searched them for weapons, checked them for injuries, and gave them water and food. Then we waited. "For how long?" Megan asked, her voice trembling. "You can't just leave us in here." "We've seen reports of people who look fine for hours and then change," Maria said gently. "We have to be sure. If you're clear, we'll move you into the main area. You'll be under our rules like everyone else. No one here wants to turn you away." Dixon stayed outside the open door, talking to his sister through the frame. He told her about our preparations, about the bunkers and the barricades, about how we could hold out for a while if we were careful. Time proved them clean. No fevers, no odd behavior, no sudden aggression. After a full day and night, Maria cleared them to join the group. Megan immediately threw herself into helping in the kitchen and with basic cleaning and sorting tasks. Her son attached himself to Lewis, who had a talent for distracting him with stories about harmless training mishaps. More people trickled in over the next week. A retired medic couple from a nearby housing area. A young man who had been camping in the hills and came down when he saw smoke. An older warehouse worker who had walked for miles along the train tracks to avoid the roads. Each arrival forced us to make the same calculation. Compassion balanced against risk. We made a rule. Anyone who wanted to enter had to spend at least 24 hours in the quarantine room until we were sure they showed no signs of infection. No exceptions. The first time that wasn't enough, it almost tore us apart. He arrived just before sunset, a lone figure stumbling along the access road. He wore a torn Army combat uniform and carried a rucksack. Even from a distance, I could see blood on his sleeve. When he got closer, we recognized the name tape. Harris. He was a private from the ammunition company that sometimes drew from our depot. "Hold up," Maria called, raising a hand. "Stop right there." He stopped, swaying slightly. Up close, he looked exhausted. His face was chalky, lips dry. The blood on his sleeve had soaked through the fabric. "They got the motor pool," he said. "I barely made it out. I saw the depot from the hill and thought maybe someone was still here." "Were you bitten?" Maria asked, eyes locked on the stain. "No," he said quickly. "I caught the edge of some shrapnel when a Humvee hit a barrier. It's just a cut." "Show me," she said. He hesitated just for a moment. Then he rolled up his sleeve. The wound on his forearm was jagged, as if torn rather than sliced cleanly. I couldn't tell if teeth had done that or metal, not from where I stood. Maria's expression did not change. "You'll go into quarantine," she said. 24 hours. If you're clear, we'll bring you into the main area. We'll clean and bandage that properly. Until then, no contact with anyone else. Those are the rules." He looked past her at the admin building, the bunkers, the faint glow of lights inside. "You can't just lock me in a room," he said. "I'm not sick." "We lock everyone in a room first," she said. "That's why we're still standing." He finally nodded, though the resentment in his eyes was clear. We put him in the quarantine room, secured the door, and slid in water and food. The medic couple cleaned his wound carefully through latex gloves, doing what they could without prolonged close contact. For the first 12 hours, he seemed fine. He slept, ate, told us bits of what he'd seen on the main base. Crowds pushing against gates, soldiers firing warning shots that did nothing to slow infected who no longer cared about threats. A command post overrun when someone inside turned. At hour 18, his temperature spiked. The medic, Mark, spotted it first. "He's burning up," he said through the partially open door. "Pulse is racing. Pupils are strange. We need to back off and watch from outside." Harris grew restless, pacing the small room, muttering under his breath. Then, around dawn, he suddenly slammed his palm against the window, eyes unfocused, hitting the glass again and again with increasing force. "Let me out," he said. Then, "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out." The words merging into a rough chant. Every training video I had half-watched about the infection came back in a wave. The loss of higher reasoning, the repetitive motions, the aggression. He grabbed the edge of the metal bed frame and tried to wrench it free. When that failed, he turned back to the door and threw himself against it, over and over. The sound of his shoulder hitting metal echoed through the hallway. "We can't let him turn in there," Maria said quietly. "If he changes, he'll keep throwing himself against the door until something gives, or until he breaks his own body. Either way, he'll be a constant danger to anyone passing by. And if he ever gets out—" Nobody finished that sentence. We used one of the bunkers in the far, unused section of the depot for what came next. I will not describe the details. We sedated him as best we could. We made sure he would not wake up into whatever the infection would have turned him into. We did what we had to do, quickly and with as much dignity as the situation allowed. Afterward, the air seemed heavier. Megan avoided eye contact with Maria for a day. Dixon walked the perimeter by himself, head down. Lewis stared at his hands a lot. That night, as I stood watch on the roof of the admin building, Maria joined me with 2 mugs of instant coffee. "You think we did the right thing?" I asked. "Right isn't always a single choice," she said. "Sometimes you pick the option that puts the fewest people at risk. That's what Command always preached. Now we're Command." "You sound like you've made peace with it." She stared out at the dark silhouette of the bunkers. "I haven't," she said. "I just don't have time to fall apart. Not yet." The weeks blurred into a rough routine. We established shifts. We turned the admin building into a living space, with sleeping areas and a makeshift kitchen. The bunkers around us became our supply cache, training area, tool shed, medical room, and walk-in pantry. We found out quickly that our biggest limiting factor wasn't ammunition or space. It was fuel. The generators that powered our lights, cameras, and radios all ran on diesel. Our on-site tanks held enough for a while, but not for months of continuous running. We had to ration power. lights in the evening and early night, minimal use during the day, no unnecessary equipment running. Ortega rigged a schedule for generator maintenance. "We can stretch these machines if we don't push them too hard," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We kill them early. We lose more than comfort. We lose cameras. We lose electric locks. We're back to padlocks and flashlights." We began planning fuel runs to the main base motor pool, and, when that seemed too risky, to small off-site service yards and farms that had above-ground tanks. Every time we left the depot, the world looked a little worse. Cars sat abandoned on the shoulders, some crashed, some just stopped with their doors open. We saw signs of desperate attempts at roadblocks, overturned trailers, hand-painted warnings nailed to boards. Once we saw a house with its windows boarded, and a large spray-painted message on the garage door telling everyone to keep moving. We saw infected, too. Sometimes solitary figures wandering along the roadside. Sometimes clusters drawn to noise. They did not stagger mindlessly the way movies always showed. They moved with erratic bursts of speed, driven by a focus that had nothing to do with their own safety. We learned to avoid drawing attention, no horn honking, no shouting, only necessary shots, and even then with suppressors when we could improvise them, or with shotguns packed with lower noise loads we tuned for short range. One trip changed the balance of our little community. We picked up a weak distress call on a handheld radio one afternoon, a woman's voice, faint and crackling. "Clinic. Anyone on this net, please respond." Maria and I were in the admin office, where a tangle of radios and chargers shared space with logbooks and a map wall. "This is Ammo Depot," Maria said into the handset. "Say again your location." Static hissed. Then, "Community Health Clinic off County Road 15. We have injured. Limited supplies. We can see. Groups outside." I traced the road on our map with a finger. The clinic was roughly 10 miles away, in a small cluster of buildings near a junction. "We can't save everyone who calls for help," I said softly. "No," she said, "but a clinic means medical supplies. If they fall, those supplies end up scattered or ruined. If we reach them, we help people and improve our own chances. That's 2 reasons." She gathered a team, herself, me, Dixon, and Mark the medic. We took the same reinforced pickup, plus an older Humvee we'd recovered from a nearby maintenance yard. Ortega stayed behind as acting leader. The drive out was tense but uneventful. As we approached the clinic, a low, single-story building with a flat roof and glass doors, we saw clusters of infected moving around the parking lot. Some were hitting the building walls, others stood twitching near cars. "Windows look boarded from inside," Dixon said, squinting through binoculars. "They're still holding them out for now." "We can't just drive up the main entrance," Maria said. "We'll have a crowd around us in seconds. We need a distraction." We used the Humvee. Dixon took the wheel, circling wide to the far end of the lot and laying on the horn once he was at a safe distance. The sound cut through the air like a blade. Heads snapped in his direction. Infected turned and began converging on the vehicle. He kept them at a distance, rolling slowly backward as they approached, then accelerating enough to force them to turn and chase again. "Go," he said over the radio. "You've got a window." Maria and I sprinted from the pickup to the clinic's side door with Mark close behind. We kept low, weapons ready, trying not to think about how exposed we were. At the door, Maria pounded 3 times, then shouted, "Ammo Depot, we're here to help. Open up if you can." There was a pause. Then I heard the scrape of a bolt and the click of a lock. The door opened just wide enough for us to slip in. A tired-looking woman in scrubs with a stethoscope around her neck slammed it shut behind us and engaged multiple locks. "I'm Dr. Lin," she said breathlessly. "I hope you brought more than good intentions." "We have a truck," Maria said. "We can move supplies and people. How many inside?" 6 staff, counting me," she said. 3 patients who can walk. 2 who can't. We've been holding out for days, but the water line went from a trickle to nothing this morning. We were about to try to make a run for it. "We'll take you to a secure site," Maria said. "We have defenses, generators, food, and a controlled process for screening newcomers." Screening. Dr. Lin raised an eyebrow. "Quarantine," Maria said. "We've seen what happens if we skip it." She nodded once. "Fine. Then let's talk priorities. We can't carry everything. We take antibiotics, pain control, wound care, the portable monitors, and any medical tools we can't easily replace. The rest we leave behind." We moved fast. Mark knew what to grab and what to leave. We loaded boxes onto wheeled carts and shuttled them through the back corridor to the truck, timing each dash with Dixon's movements. The infected outside were still focused on the noisy Humvee, which he kept in constant motion. The 2 bedbound patients were the hardest. We wrapped them in blankets, lifted them carefully onto wheeled gurneys, and pushed them out through the loading bay, using the truck's tailgate as a ramp. One of them, an older man with a bandaged leg, gripped my wrist. "Not going to leave me behind after all this, are you?" he asked. "Not today," I said. We got everyone loaded. That last stretch moving from the clinic's rear to the waiting truck felt like crossing a shooting range. The infected started to notice the new movement. A few broke off from the crowd around the Humvee and headed our way. 5 coming in from the north, Dixon reported, his voice level but fast. "You've got about 30 seconds before more notice." We secured the last of the boxes in the truck bed, then piled into the cab. Maria slapped the dash. "Dixon, break contact and head home," she said over the radio. "We're right behind you." He floored the Humvee, drawing the mass of infected after him. We used the open lane he created to swing around and get back onto the road. A few infected reached out for the truck as we passed, slapping the metal side panels, but none got a grip. Once we were clear and the clinic was receding in the mirror, Dr. Lin let out a long breath. "You said you have a site," she said. "Somewhere defensible, with a fence." "It's an ammunition depot," I said. "It was built to keep people away from things that explode. We're using that design to keep people safe instead." When we rolled back through the gate, our numbers had jumped by 97 new adults, 2 additional patients, and our supply situation had improved dramatically. Our responsibility had grown just as much. Dr. Lin immediately took over the medical side of our operation. She set up a more organized infirmary in one of the inner bunkers, with cots, shelves, and a table cleared for procedures. She worked with Mark and his wife to draft basic health rules: hand washing, isolation for any new cough or fever, and strict protocols for treating anyone with unexplained injuries. With her help, we began to pull our scattered efforts into something more like a real community. We made a big decision then. We would stop thinking of ourselves as a temporary group of survivors, waiting for rescue, and start thinking of the depot as a long-term stronghold. That meant planning for months, not days. We mapped every resource we had: water sources, food stockpiles, generator capacity, even spare parts for vehicles and tools. We wrote it all down in a notebook that became our makeshift operations manual. We also prepared for the thing we had been dreading since day one: a large, coordinated movement of infected toward our perimeter. It came sooner than we wanted. It started with distant smoke and the faint sound of explosions from the direction of the city. Not the sharp cracks of rifles, but the deeper, rolling thumps of something bigger, maybe a gas line rupturing. Maybe a fuel depot going up. About a day later, the camera feeds along the access road began picking up more movement. Not just the occasional wandering figure, but steady clusters of infected moving in the same general direction. Some took the highway, others drifted along the frontage roads, drawn by sounds we couldn't hear. By sunset, we could see them from the tower. Dozens, maybe hundreds, spread out across the fields and roads like a loose, ragged swarm. They weren't moving in perfect unison, but they were flowing roughly toward us, or toward the base area beyond. "They'll hit the main base first," Maria said, binoculars pressed to her eyes. "If there's anything left to hit, but this place is in their path." "How many can we handle?" I asked. "As long as they're coming in small groups, our fences and firepower give us the edge," she said. "But if the fence gets clogged with bodies, or if they start climbing over each other without caring about injury, the outer barrier could give. Then we're fighting in our own lanes." We had always known this was a possibility. That was why we had built the inner horseshoe and stocked the bunkers closest to the admin building. That was why Ortega had quietly set up controlled charges on some of the outer structures, in case we needed to deny the infected any cover or material they could use to climb. That night, we put everyone on alert. "We may not get much sleep," Maria told the gathered group in the break room. "If you are not assigned to a fighting position, your job is to stay low. Listen for instructions, and be ready to move if we have to fall back from the outer line. There is no shame in fear. There is only what you do with it." I took the first outer perimeter watch with Dixon and Lewis. We manned a makeshift fighting position behind one of the concrete barriers near the gate, rifles ready, a box of loaded magazines by our knees. The cameras fed grainy images to a monitor beside us, showing black shapes moving through the darker landscape. The first infected reached our fence line around midnight. We heard them before we clearly saw them. The scrape of hands on chain link, the faint thud of bodies hitting metal. Then, in the pale glow of a mounted floodlight, we saw fingers gripping the wire, faces pressed against the gaps. They clawed and shook the fence, heedless of the noise or their own skin. "Hold fire," Maria's voice came over the radio. "They're testing the barrier. We only shoot when there's a real attempt to breach or when we can't reinforce physically." The fence shivered under the onslaught but held. The barbed wire at the top kept them from simply climbing over, though a few tried, tearing their clothes and skin without flinching, then falling back into the crowd. The real test came about an hour later, when a larger group approached the main gate itself. We had piled concrete barriers and steel containers in front of the gate to create a funnel where anything pushing in would have to compress into a narrow lane. Now that lane filled with bodies pressing forward, adding their weight to the metal. The gate creaked. "Front team, you are free to engage," Maria said. "Short, controlled bursts, aim center mass if they're pushing on the gate. Headshots only if you're steady and confident." We rose a bit higher behind our barrier, bracing our rifles. I took a breath, lined up my sights on the widest cluster, and squeezed the trigger in a short burst. The recoil was familiar. The crack of the shots loud even with the rifle's flash suppressor. Several infected staggered and fell, but the ones behind them pushed forward, trampling over them without hesitation. Lewis fired in measured, steady, single shots, picking targets that were actively climbing the fence posts near the gate. Dixon used a shotgun to blast any that managed to get near the inner barrier. The noise drew more infected. They came from the sides now, filling the funnel. The fence rattled under the combined pressure. A section began to bow inward. "Brace that panel," Maria shouted into the radio. "Team 2, move to the west corner and reinforce." Ortega and another volunteer sprinted along the inside of the fence, carrying a length of chain and a heavy steel post. Working together, they lashed the sagging section to the post and drove it into the earth with a sledgehammer, even as hands clawed from the other side. The hours blurred into a pattern. Bursts of gunfire, shouted commands, the creak and rattle of stressed metal. We rotated shooters to keep arms from cramping and eyes from glazing. We used flares to light up any dark corners where infected might be hiding. We tossed smoke grenades when the visual overload got to be too much, giving ourselves a momentary screen. At some point, I realized I had stopped thinking of them as people. It wasn't a conscious choice. It just happened. The thing on the other side of the fence trying to get at me had intentions that didn't leave room for negotiation. My empathy had to take a back seat to survival if any of us were going to see dawn. Still, we were not machines. We felt it afterward. Around 4 a.m, the pressure on the gate began to lessen. The infected that remained were scattered, wandering along the fence or moving away toward other sounds in the distance. Our ammunition crates were noticeably lighter. The concrete barrier in front of the gate was smeared and chipped. The chain link showed several bent sections, but it held. We had survived our first major assault. As the sky lightened, painting the bunkers in pale gray, the people who had not been on the front line emerged slowly from the admin building. Some cried quietly. Others hugged each other. Dr. Lin moved among us, checking for injuries, burns, or hearing damage. Maria took a slow walk on along the inner horseshoe, touching each bunker door she passed. "We proved the concept," she said to me when she reached my position. Her voice was hoarse. "The depot can be held. It's not invincible, but it can be defended." "For how long?" I asked. "As long as we keep our rules," she said. "As long as we ration our supplies, control who comes in, and never let complacency settle in. The world outside is broken. In here, we have a chance to build something that works, even if it is small." Over the next weeks, that's what we did. We turned portions of unused bunker roofs into small gardens, using soil from the surrounding land and seeds scavenged from stores and homes. We collected rainwater from the gently sloped bunker sides into barrels. We created a simple training program for anyone who could hold a rifle, teaching them not just how to shoot, but how to observe, communicate, and work in teams. We assigned roles: watchstanders, cooks, sanitation crews, mechanics, medics. Dixon took charge of transportation and external recon. Ortega built and repaired everything from door frames to improvised stoves. Lewis became our de facto radio operator, scanning frequencies for any signs of organized authority. Sometimes we heard fragments, distant military transmissions discussing containment lines in other states, a scratchy signal from what might have been a state emergency operations center, local amateur radio operators trying to coordinate neighborhood defenses. Nothing close enough or reliable enough to change our situation. So we focused on what we could control. We added layers to our defenses, hollowing out firing positions into the earth berms around the bunkers, building small covered walkways between structures so we could move without being fully exposed, setting trip lines with empty cans to alert us to movement in blind spots. Every night, we closed the inner gates and did one last perimeter check. Every morning, we reviewed our logs and adjusted our plans. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the low hills and bathed the depot in a warm, dusty light, I climbed up onto the roof of Bunker 7 and sat there for a while. From that vantage point, I could see almost the entire Stronghold. The admin building, with smoke rising from its chimney pipe, the horseshoe of bunkers with their newly painted numbers, the faint gleam of concertina wire at the perimeter. Beyond that, the endless wave of prairie, broken by the dark ribbon of the highway and the occasional cluster of trees. I remembered what this place had been before, a quiet corner of a larger machine, a storage yard for tools of war used far away. Now, those tools kept a few dozen people alive in a world where the usual rules no longer applied. Maria joined me, climbing the short metal ladder and sitting down a few feet away. "Nice view," she said. "It was always here," I said. "We just never needed it this much." "You ever wonder what happens if things outside never go back to normal?" she asked. "I used to," I said. "Now I think about keeping this place running one more day, then another. If we stack enough of those together, maybe that's our new version of normal." She nodded, then smiled in a way I hadn't seen since before the outbreak. "Not everyone can say they turned an ammo depot into a functioning stronghold," she said. "You dragged a lot of pallets to make this happen." "I had help," I said. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind move across the wire and the faint sounds of life below. Someone laughing softly, a pot clanging in the kitchen, the hiss of a generator cycling down as Ortega switched us to lower power for the night. The world beyond our fences was still dangerous and uncertain. There were more infected out there, more broken communities, more people trying to survive in less defensible places. Maybe someday we'd be strong enough to extend our reach, to build a network of strongholds, to help others turn their own fragile shelters into something more sustainable. For now, we had our walls, our rules, and each other. The ammo depot had been built to protect explosives from accidents, fire, and theft. Under our hands, it had become a fortress against something far worse. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't guaranteed, but it was ours. And as long as we held this ground, as long as we kept the lights flickering and the watch posts manned, as long as we remembered why we had quarantine rules and ration charts and patrol schedules, this patch of concrete and earth would remain a place where people could live, not just survive. In a world ruled by noise and chaos, the orderly rows of bunkers and the steady rhythm of our watch rotations were the closest thing we had to stability. The outbreak had taken everything familiar from us. But in the middle of that, inside the fences of an old ammo depot on the Colorado prairie, we had built something new. We had turned a storage yard into a stronghold. And for now, that was enough.